Since its release almost 2 years ago in 2016, The Division has been plagued with issues. Starting with the graphics downgrade that sparked fury on the internet, more on this in a bit, to completely broken and laggy matchmaking, and the nightmare that was the Darkzone in its original form that was infested with hackers. All this drove people away from the game, but I think it's a game that has been misunderstood and also failed to recover properly from its disastrous launch the first few months after. Credit goes to Ubisoft, and more importantly its developer Massive, for not giving up on this game. It would have been a lot easier and more cost efficient to just drop support for the game, cut their losses and move on to another project or perhaps even a sequel, but instead they stuck with it. On a side note, this is becoming a trend now for Ubisoft, as Rainbow Six Siege has been on a similar trajectory after a very bad launch and is arguably the best first-person tactical shooter out today. There have been multiple patches since to try and fix the issues with the game, and lots of great content added to support the patches, including 2 free updates in the Year 2 expansion. Now, finally, I think that The Division can be a game that people can come back to and enjoy. The game that it was meant to be, and maybe even more so. Let me explain. So let's talk about the launch of The Division for a bit. I remember when it was first announced way back at E3 2013. The game looked incredible and immediately generated a huge amount of hype, for good reason. The trailer was spectacular, and the promise of a co-op open world game was something that wasn't really expanded on at that time, especially in the shooter realm. But that's the very first thing that most people got wrong about this game. It's not a shooter. Well, technically it is, but it's an RPG first and foremost, and people who were expecting this to be a straight up shooter were always going to be disappointed. Again, more on this in a bit. Then there was the issue of the graphics. In typical Ubisoft fashion, everyone remembers the Watch Dogs graphics downgrade debacle. They released a trailer that looked as if it would have some of the most amazing graphics to date in a game. Now don't get me wrong, I do think that the graphics in The Division are good, but they are definitely not what was promised. There are so many videos on YouTube that show side by side comparisons, and it's very clear to see that we did not get what was promised. I won't go too much more into this, as there are countless other videos that analyse this to death, and this isn't what I want to explore in this video, but it is important to note. So I mentioned earlier that The Division is an RPG or MMO, massively multiplayer online game first and a shooter second, and I want to expand on this a little bit more. This following quote is taken straight from Ubisoft's website. Tom Clancy's The Division is a revolutionary next-gen experience that brings the RPG into a modern military setting for the first time. It's an RPG with a modern military setting. And this is so very apparent from the start. Ubisoft's own art director Rodrigo Cortez had this to say about the game as well. For us, one of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to tell people how much of an RPG it is. It has shooting and is shooter-like. If you look at it, that's the whole point, because we want it to be very immersive, but it's not a shooter with some RPG stats tacked on. It's actually a proper RPG from the very beginning. There's deep progression when it comes to loot, gear and levels, and you'll be able to customize every skill, do exactly what you want and choose roles. So that's probably the biggest communication challenge. We want to make clear to everyone that it's an RPG. I think people struggle with this, as the RPG elements of the game make it pretty unrealistic. Think of the bullet sponge bosses and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But that's what we've come to expect from RPGs. What other characteristics do RPGs have? Cooperative raids? Check. RNG loot? Check. PvE and PvP zones? Check. Crafting? Check. The only thing that makes this game a shooter is the fact that it has guns instead of magic and swords, bows and a fantasy setting, etc. If people start to approach this game with the mind frame that it's an MMORPG, then I can guarantee that they will have a better time. Now, admittedly, I had bought the game at release and I played it for a while, but then I grew tired of it. I uninstalled it and simply forgot about it until recently. I noticed that there was a little bit of a buzz around it again, so I decided to install it again and see for myself, and I was pleasantly surprised. I had a blast playing the underground missions that had been added as of the 1.3 patch, which shows you how long I hadn't played it in. They finally addressed the rogue system in the Darkzone as a patch 1.8 with what they call Rogue 2.0, with the most important thing being that you actually have to select if you want to go rogue via a toggle rather than shooting your teammates in the back and running away with the loot. They've also added a feature called Resistance, which is a PvE mode where you fight waves of enemies. I've yet to try this, but I am looking forward to it. There's so much more that has been added as well that I think it's probably the right time for anyone who has bought The Division and, like me, has forgotten about it, to give it another try and see what they think. It's also arguably the best time for new players to get into it, as it is now the complete game that it should have been at launch. Ubisoft is moving towards a games as a service model with its yearly update features, and I for one like the idea. It provides longevity to a game and you get the feeling that they really do care. Rainbow Six Siege has a similar model and I will be covering that in another video. I'd love for this to be a discussion, so I'd really like to get your feedback in the comments. Have you played The Division and hated it, or did you get bored of it and uninstall and forget about it like me? Do you think you'd be willing to give it another try? Leave me a comment below and let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, this has been BucklingOne, and I'll see you in my next video.